Chapter 261. Maisie certainly would not bother Sherry with anything else, so she only responded with a smile. Raven came forward after Sherry left, wanting to gossip. "Sis Maisie, are you Sis Sherry's relative?" "Of course not." Maisie burst into a giggle and placed the backpack that she brought along with her on the bed. Raven sat on the bed, tilted her head, and looked at her with a frown. "Then you and Sis Sherry must know each other." Maisie unpacked all her toiletries, looked at her, and said, "You can consider us acquaintances." "What's the matter with that?" Raven shook her head and asked again all of a sudden, "Why did you come to the training camp? Do you plan to become an agent too?" Maisie paused for a short moment and then asked, with a slightly bewildered expression, "Is this training camp a place that trains agents?" She really did not know about that. "Yeah, don't you know about that?" Raven was surprised, but Maisie really did not know. Seeing that Maisie did not understand what she was walking into, Raven did not look surprised. "It's normal that you don't know. After all, this training camp is privately owned, and everything is generally kept strictly confidential. Those who graduate from here either become top-secret agents, world-class goons, personal bodyguards, and so on. Of course, many of us want to be recruited by the top management and become a top-notch goon, just like Brother Hans. He has a very high status here." Raven talked with relish and did not notice the surprise on Maisie's face. If everything is as Raven said, the Swallow County's training camp is a place where they train secret agents. Then the top management she mentioned are people or organizations that are related to the Goldmans? Raven, can I know more about the top management that you just talked about? Seeing that Maisie really did not know anything, Raven naturally shared everything with her enthusiastically, but she did not know much either. "I heard from our seniors that the headquarters of the training camp is located in Staslo. Anyway, it has a very influential status. It's said that it has something to do with the eldest daughter of the royal family." "The eldest daughter? Isn't that the eldest princess of Staslo's royal family? How should I put it? The organization above our top management is made up of guards who are loyal to the eldest daughter of the royal family. They were seen as the bodyguards of the eldest daughter of the royal family," Raven answered with a smile. Maisie nodded all of a sudden. She had probably picked something up from that explanation. However, the Goldmans actually have such a relationship with the eldest princess of the royal family? After chatting with Maisie about some other things, Raven also informed Maisie about their daily training methods. The first thing that a newcomer should do on their first day was to get acquainted with the environment. One had to wake up at 5 o'clock the next morning, must fold their blanket, wear their military boots neatly, and then gather outside in the shortest possible time. In fact, it closely resembled military training in the beginning. One would be punished if they were to be late. The general punishment was to complete a few laps around the field, or they could be punished to stand for 2 hours and skip breakfast. Raven had been here for 3 months, so she was rather familiar with the rules. However, she was not as familiar with them as those seniors. Thus, she still had to ask the seniors for some advice if she were not to understand something. Maisie mentally noted down everything and asked when she thought of something. "What kind of training would be included in the assessments?" Raven propped her hand against her chin and thought. "Training that would be included, huh? There are literary exams, physical training, and shooting classes. The highest score for each assessment is 60 points. You'll have to score at least 120 points as a total for the 3 assessments to pass." "What will they test in the literacy test and physical training?" "The literacy test will test our language and business knowledge. First of all, you have to master a foreign language. Physical training is all about wrestling and mixed martial arts. But you've just arrived here, so you don't need to know these just yet unless you want to be assessed in advance," Raven added. Chapter 262. Maisie's eyes drooped slightly. "It turns out that there were 3 assessments, and I only have half a month," which means that I have to apply to be assessed within a week. I have to achieve good results within half a month. The highest score for an assessment is 60 points. And I only need to obtain the standard score of 120 points to pass. In the evening, Raven took Maisie to the dining hall for dinner. The dining hall was a public area, and it was a duplex. There were basically more men than women at first glance. There's always time to start eating. If you were to come late, then there would be nothing left to eat. It seems that you have a memorable experience when it comes to this rule. Maisie teased her. Raven smiled in embarrassment. Maisie and Raven walked up to the line to queue for dinner. But Maisie bumped into someone's foot while walking by a table. If Raven had not supported her, she would have fallen. The man who was lying on the chair resting on his back with his beret covering his face almost fell over because of the collision. He took off his beret and sat up in a fit of anger. "Who's this? How dare you run into my legs? Are you blind?" When the man saw a delicate and beautiful face, he held back his swear words and changed his tone in a daze. "Oh, it's fine." Maisie did not want to cause trouble either. So she nodded slightly and left with Raven to grab dinner. Another man reached out and waved right in front of his eyes. "Mr. Boucher, she's gone away. Come back to your senses." "Fuck you." Francisco pushed his hand away, stared at the crowd that was queuing again, grinned, and said to himself, "Since when did such a goddess arrive at the training camp? I've never seen her before." He was already getting extremely impatient in Swallow County as he could not see anyone who looked good enough to satiate his appetite. But her appearance. He realized that he could still find happiness while staying in Swallow County, and his happiness was back. Raven and Maisie fetched their dinner and walked to a table at the side. Raven then whispered to her, "Hey. You should stay away from the person who you bumped into just now in the future. He's the bully of the training camp. All ordinary people would stay as far away from him as possible." "Is he so scary?" Maisie was helpless. "We can't afford to offend him because of his family's background. We're here for training, but this bastard is here for vacation as he can hardly be seen in any training." Maisie just smiled and did not say a word when she saw Raven complaining in a low voice. The reason she had come here was just to get the assessment results. And she did not care about other things that had nothing to do with her at all. But not long after Raven finished speaking, a dashing figure leaned over, sat down, flung his fringe to the side, and propped his elbows against the table to look at Maisie. "Our new goddess. Are you interested in getting to know more about each other?" Maisie turned to look at him, raised the corners of his lips, and gave off a faint smile. No, Francisco got rejected. The men behind Francisco kicked up a fuss, their voices attracting many people's gazes. Francisco glared at them. What do these douchebags think they're doing? Although he had lost some prestige when he got rejected, he did not care about her reaction because she looked good. "Little goddess, I'm not a bad person. So let me introduce myself first. My name is Francisco. Just say my name whenever you run into any trouble in the future. None will dare to bully you." Maisie was a little helpless. "There's no need for that, thank you." Raven looked at Maisie nervously and was perspiring at the side. This sounds too disrespectful to the bastard. If he were to lose his cool. Chapter 263. Huh? No matter how I look at him, there's no trace of anger on that bastard's face. Instead, he's propping his hand against his head and staring at Maisie with a smile. Francisco squinted his fox-like eyes. "Are you trying to draw my attention?" "Generally. If an ordinary woman wants to attract my attention, I'll only think that she's a pretentious one. But everything's fine if she were to apply this method when she's trying to capture my attention." Maisie almost spats out the broth that she had in her mouth. She chuckled out of rage and turned to look at him. "Lil brother, you're quite a narcissistic one." He nodded. "I know that. Maisie was rendered speechless. Francisco thought of something all of a sudden and took a bar of chocolate out of his pocket. It's a brand from Ampleforth. Would you like to try it? Probably because he was afraid Maisie would reject his offer, he added, there are so many people watching. It'll be extremely embarrassing if you reject me again. Take it. Francisco took Maisie's hand, placed the bar of chocolate in her hand, got up, and returned to his table with his hand buried in the pockets of his trousers. Maisie had no idea what had just happened. A woman sitting at a table not far away looked over at Maisie's table. The woman with long black hair and a pearl hairpin shoved her spoon into the food on the plate ruthlessly, and the two ladies sitting beside her noticed the obvious change in her expression. The short-haired girl muttered, "How could Mr. Boucher do that? Sis Wynonna gave him that bar of chocolate. Mr. Boucher has actually given the bar of chocolate that Wynonna gave him to another woman." Maisie and Raven returned to their room. "I didn't expect Mr. Boucher to give you chocolate. The chocolate from this brand is very expensive," Raven said, and suddenly looked at Maisie with a gossipy face. "Sis Maisie, does he like you?" "Don't, I'm only here to train for half a month. I don't want to have anything to do with him." "You're just here to train for half a month?" Raven was curious. "Didn't you want to become an agent?" Maisie nodded. "Yes, it's just 2 weeks of training for me." The next day, like the other trainees, Maisie woke up at 5 o'clock. Probably because of the weather, the sky was still dark, and it was still drizzling outside. Training would not be postponed even if it was raining. Everyone ran laps around the field in the rain. The male instructor was staring at them from the side. The whistle would sound at any minute if anyone were found slacking off. Raven ran behind Maisie. Because the rain was hitting her on the face, she could not even breathe smoothly and could only inhale and exhale through her widely open mouth. What the hell is wrong with this weather? It hasn't rained in months. Who knows? Maybe today is an unlucky day. A few girls who were running alongside her complained while panting. Maisie's face was also covered with icy cold rain. She did not utter a single word in order to maintain her physical strength. She even had to adjust the frequency of her breathing. A figure quickly caught up to her. "How was the chocolate from last night? Was it delicious?" Maisie took a glance at Francisco, who was all smiles, and almost rolled her eyes. This useless piece of trash is so difficult to deal with. She accelerated and ran forward while Francisco, who was left behind, continued to follow her. "Hey, little goddess, run slowly, don't slip and fall." At Black Gold Group. "Mr. Goldman, Ms. Vanderbilt is doing very well in the army. You can rest assured." Nolan closed the documents and looked up at Quincy. "I can't even see her, so how can I believe that she's doing fine? It's raining today, and I don't know whether that woman has to get up in the morning to train in the rain. What if she catches a cold? Can she sleep without me by her side? Will her roommate bully her and plot against her?" Chapter 264. I really want to see my wife. I miss her a lot on the first day she is away. Quincy rolled his eyes helplessly. "Mr. Goldman, Ms. Vanderbilt will only stay there for half a month. Not for a few years. Wouldn't Mr. Goldman lose his mind if she were to have to stay there for a few years?" There was a knock on the door of the office, and Rowena walked in. She then walked forward with a smile. "Nolan, Grandpa is going to take a trip back to the Goldman family estate. And Ms. Vanderbilt isn't here either. He specially entrusted me to go fetch the 3 children at night." Nolan frowned slightly. "The 3 kids don't like Rowena. They'll definitely make a fuss if she goes to pick them up." He responded lightly, "There's no need for you to do so. I'll pick them up tonight and go to the Vanderbilt Manor." He had promised Maisie that he would bring the child to visit Stephen whenever he had time. Rowena's expression did not change when he rejected her offer. "Well then, I'll go back first." The moment she turned around, the smile on the corners of her lips faded away, and her face turned gloomy. When she walked to the elevator, she took out her cell phone and made a call expressionlessly. "Winnie, are you still in the training camp?" "Yes, I'm back. I'll go to the training camp to visit you tomorrow." The next day, Raven and Maisie were walking on the field. "We're going to start field training tomorrow. Sis Maisie, have you thought about who you want to team up with?" "No. We'll see what the instructor's arrangement will look like." During field training, trainees would be sent to a concentration camp deep in the mountains, and they needed to form a team of 2. It did not matter to Maisie how she would be assigned. After all, she only needed to complete the task. Maisie and Raven were walking toward the ground floor of their room when they suddenly saw a familiar figure approaching. It was none other than Rowena. "Ms. Vanderbilt, what a coincidence. Is everything going well in the training camp these 2 days?" Rowena put on a faint smile on her face. Raven did not know Rowena, but she thought she was good-looking, so she took a few more glances. The beauty of this woman feels rather aggressive. Of course. Sis Maisie doesn't look too bad herself. It's just that her looks seem more elegant and intellectual. Maisie did not have a good impression of Rowena, but she did not have any bad mentality about her either as she was not familiar with her. "Yes, everything has been going quite well. What brings you here, to the training camp, Miss Summers?" "I came to visit a friend of mine. After all, I was trained in this camp before." Speaking of the training camp, Nolan was there before. Rowena stroked her long hair and moved them behind her. When Maisie saw the white jade ring on her thumb, her eyes turned slightly cold. That white jade ring. It was the one that Nolan bought at the jade store. Maisie's expression looked gloomy. "So she deliberately brought her ring along to show it off to me?" Rowena noticed her gaze, raised her hand that was wearing the white jade ring, and touched the cold white jade ring. "Are you staring at this ring?" "I'm sorry, I thought this white jade ring looked good while we were at the jade store the other day, but I didn't expect Nolan to buy it." "Really? It does somewhat suit you." Maisie turned around and was about to leave, but Rowena stopped her. "Ms. Vanderbilt, please don't misunderstand. After all, Nolan and I have known each other since we were kids." Maisie stopped for a split second. This woman keeps on reminding me that she and Nolan are childhood friends. Is she implying the first come, first served system? Maisie turned around, looked at her, and gave off an ear-to-ear grin. "There's nothing to be misunderstood. It's just," she narrowed her eyes. "You don't have to mention the friendship that you have with him to me this deliberately. No matter how close the both of you are, you're still just his childhood friend." Maisie walked into the building after saying that, while Raven caught up to her immediately. Chapter 265. Rowena stood downstairs with her arms crossed in front of her and watched as the silhouette entered the building, her eyes looking gloomy. If it weren't for those 3 children, how would she be worthy enough of standing beside Nolan? "Sis Rowena. Have you waited for a long time?" Only then did Wynonna hurried over, interrupted Rowena's thoughts, and exclaimed with a smile, "I didn't expect you to really come back." "Yeah, how are things in the training camp recently?" Rowena's expression changed as if nothing had happened. "Everything's fine. It's just a newcomer arrived 2 days ago, and I don't really like her." Wynonna's expression looked really upset when she mentioned the newcomer. Rowena raised her eyebrows slightly. "Which newcomer are you referring to? Her last name is Vanderbilt or something like that." "Maisie Vanderbilt?" A hint of surprise flashed across Rowena's eyes. She did not expect that Wynonna would know about Maisie since the latter had just arrived here for a day. "Yes, it's her. I don't like her very much. She just arrived here, and she has already managed to make Mr. Boucher take a fancy to her and pester her all the time. She's definitely a vixen. She really pisses me off." Wynonna's words made the smile hanging on Rowena's lips look a little more ominous. Wynonna doesn't like Maisie. Things have just become a lot easier. It seems that I don't even need to do anything against Maisie. It was already very late when Nolan brought the 3 children back to the Goldman mansion from the Vanderbilt manor. It seemed that the children had gotten along with Stephen and had obviously accepted Stephen as their maternal grandfather ever since yesterday. When Rowena saw him coming back, she stepped forward with a smile. "Nolan, you're back. Have you eaten dinner? If you haven't, I'll get the servant, Daddy, I'm sleepy." Daisy asked for a hug, deliberately interrupting Rowena's sentence. Nolan crouched down and picked her up. "You've gotten sleepy so soon?" "Well, Mommy said that children have to go to bed and wake up early so that they can grow up," Daisy said while rubbing her sleepy eyes. In fact, she was not sleepy at all. She just wanted to stick with her father. Daisy wrapped her arms around his neck and asked coquettishly, "Daddy, can you read us a bedtime story then?" Nolan smiled helplessly. "Okay, Daddy will read you a story." Waylon and Colton looked at each other and rushed upstairs. "Time for a bedtime story." Rowena, who was left on the spot, clenched the hands beside her tightly when she saw Nolan ignore her completely. "It's just 3 tiny obstacles. I still have a chance of winning as long as Grandpa is satisfied with me. As for Maisie, I've never taken her seriously." After Nolan tucked the 3 rugrats into bed, he walked out of the children's room and saw Rowena walking toward him with the brocade box of the jade store. "Nolan, the ring that you bought from the jade store has arrived. I was afraid that it would go missing if left in your office, so I brought it back directly to you." Nolan took the brocade box and said lightly, "Thank you." He took the brocade box and went back to the room. Rowena lowered her eyes and smirked. No one noticed the cold and dimmed light that beamed out of her eyes. Early in the morning, the fog in the mountains had yet to dissipate, and it was not until about 10 o'clock that the cadets began to enter into the mountains under the assignment of the instructors. Everyone carried luggage that weighed a few pounds on their backs, and they went into the mountains one after another in mountaineering suits under the command. Maisie was squatting on the ground packing her bags when a girl with a ponytail approached her. "Excuse me, my teammates have temporarily formed a team with someone else today. If you haven't found yourself a partner yet, can we form a team together?" Maisie looked up at her, thinking that she had not gotten herself a teammate just yet, and nodded. "Of course. That's great." Wynonna smiled and said to the instructor, "Sir, we haven't been assigned to anyone. Can we form a team?" Chapter 266. The training instructor nodded. Wynonna walked into the mountains with Maisie and cordially looked at her. "You're Maisie, right?" "I'm Wynonna. I've been in the camp for a year." "Nice to meet you." Maisie smiled back politely. Wynonna asked, "Did you volunteer to come to the training camp?" Maisie didn't deny it but instead smiled and said, "I'm here for a test." "Oh." Wynonna nodded, looked at her, and didn't say anything more. They were surrounded by trees deep in the woods, and it was difficult to see the path. Newbies were usually arranged to go with a veteran from the camp, which was why Wynonna was in a team with her. She didn't suspect anything. "How far is the camp?" Maisie looked around. She couldn't help but feel that they're getting deeper into the woods. Wynonna walked behind her and averted her eyes when she asked. She said, "Not far, soon, about 10 minutes. Maisie didn't think anything of it. But after 10 minutes, they were still circling in the forest and hadn't caught a glimpse of the campgrounds. Maisie started suspecting. "Are we going in the right direction?" When Maisie turned around, Wynonna was nowhere to be seen. Maisie paused and looked around. "Wynonna?" Other than the sound of birds and bugs, there was no reply. Maisie looked at her surroundings and frowned. If Wynonna had been in the camp for a year, she would have known the way to the camp, unless she did this intentionally. However, Maisie hadn't offended Wynonna. It didn't matter if Wynonna did it intentionally or was just lost. What Maisie had to do then was to find Wynonna. At the campgrounds. When the training instructor did a roll call, he realized 2 people were missing. He frowned and looked at those that were there. There are 2 missing. Sir, the newbie and Wynonna are not here, someone replied. Raven scanned the crowd and didn't see Maisie. Francisco seemed to have realized something, and his eyes turned dark. Wynonna suddenly appeared alone. The training instructor walked toward her when he saw her huffing and puffing. Where's the newbie? Wynonna looked sorry. I wanted to come with her. But she ignored my orders and insisted on going toward the north. I couldn't stop her. The north. Everyone's expression changed. That was the restricted area of Swallow County. The camp was on the southern side of Swallow County. And the north was restricted because the forests there were undiscovered and unprotected. That was where wild beasts would appear. Only those who had a death wish would go in there. Francisco walked toward Wynonna. Stop joking. Why would a newbie like her ignore your command? You probably left her there. Wynonna was taken aback by how Francisco suspected her because of a newbie. Francisco, I didn't. Francisco ignored Wynonna's answer and said to the instructor, Sir, I think we should send someone to look while we still have daylight. It's going to be tough when night falls. Even though the training instructor looked unhappy about it, he knew he wouldn't want to be held responsible if a newbie entered the restricted zone. He picked up the walkie-talkie and spoke to the people in the main camp. Send a search party. Yes. Someone entered the restricted zone and needs to be rescued. Chapter 267. Meanwhile, Maisie searched around the forest for a long time, but she didn't know the exact location of the camp, so she was getting annoyed. Was she really stuck in the forest? If she continued moving around, it would be hard for the rescuers to find her. She should stay in her spot. Maisie removed her backpack and sat down, but she suddenly heard rustling coming from behind her. She got up slowly, turned toward the movement, and yelled, Wynonna? She received no reply, and the movement stopped. She gradually saw a shadow. But it was definitely not human. Maisie carefully picked up her bag and took a step backward. The rustling immediately started, and a wild boar with black skin and sharp tusks appeared. Maisie started sweating and was frozen on the spot. The first thing that came to her mind wasn't to run, because she knew she couldn't outrun it. She realized that the wild boar didn't seem to want to attack yet, so she shouldn't make sudden movements. She stepped on a branch, and a loud crack echoed. Before she could take a breath, the wild boar rushed toward her to attack. Maisie discarded her bag and ran as fast as she could to hide behind a tree. She turned and saw the boar ramming into the tree. While it was recollecting itself, she climbed up another tree. The boar rammed into the tree that she climbed onto. And she almost fell off because of the impact. She was lucky to have climbed onto a thick branch to keep her balance. After a few more rams, the boar circled the tree twice and left. Maisie caught her breath while leaning on the trunk. She stayed on the tree while waiting for the rescuers, because she didn't know where the boar was. The dark consumed the forest. Bugs could be heard in the grass. A few rays of light shone through the trees. Sherry led a team of searchers to search around the restricted zone for a few hours. The searchers held tranquilizer guns to avoid being ambushed by wild animals. One of them said, Sherry, it's getting late. We can't just keep searching. Sherry was struggling. If she couldn't find Maisie, Nolan was going to lose his temper. Another searcher looked around and couldn't help but say, it's getting too dark. Even if there was someone in the restricted area, there probably. Shut your dirty mouth. Sherry glared at him. Can't you be positive? Shoo, be quiet. I think there's something up front. A man raised his hand to stop them from talking. A few of them raised their guns and looked at the area where the movement was detected. It was pitch black around. No one could be sure if a bear or a hyena would rush out of the woods. A few of them walked forward toward the direction, shining their light. Their guns were all pointed toward the trees. They saw a source of light not far from where they were. The party immediately walked toward the light and saw Maisie picking up some wood to feed the fire under the tree. When Maisie saw Sherry and the others, she stood up and smiled weakly. "You're here. Are you all right, Z?" Sherry went forward to hold her and asked, "What's wrong with your leg?" Chapter 268. I ran into a wild boar and sprained my ankle while I was climbing a tree. Maisie had been so focused on climbing up, the pain of the sprain was overshadowed by the panic in her heart. She realized that much later. "Why are you in the restricted area?" "It's a very dangerous place." "This is a restricted zone?" Maisie asked. Sherry nodded, and the person next to her said, "This is an ancient forest that hasn't been explored. There are a lot of wild beasts here. You were lucky to have just met a wild boar. Even they didn't dare to just wander in. Seeing a wild boar was nothing. If someone with no experience ran into a wolf pack, nothing would save them." Maisie was quiet. She seemed to remember something, and her face dropped. When they got to the camp, it was really late. When the training instructor saw that everyone was back, his tense face relaxed. But since Maisie had entered a restricted zone, he was still upset. "Don't you know what restricted means? Are you trying to get into trouble? Going in there alone?" "I'm sorry." Seeing Maisie apologize politely, he didn't go on. "Don't take risks like that anymore. I'll mark you as absent for the training today. You'll clean the field tomorrow morning as a warning." Maisie got back to her room. When Raven saw her, she rushed toward her and said, "You're finally back. Are you all right? Why would you go to the restricted zone?" Maisie laid down her backpack and said, "Wynonna brought me there." "Wynonna?" Raven looked surprised. "Is it possible that? But why did she do that to you?" "No idea." Maisie was sure she hadn't offended anyone. Why would Wynonna bring her into the restricted area and leave her there alone? If she were unlucky, she wouldn't have been able to go home. She was going to put this aside for now until she talked to her. "Rye, do you have some food?" She hadn't eaten since the afternoon. Yes, Raven passed a bucket full of food to her and got another one out. "I have more if you want more." The next day at dawn, Maisie had to rake the leaves off the field alone because of the punishment while everyone had their breakfast. Francisco went over to her with the food box behind his back. He leaned under the tree and smiled. "Are you tired, little goddess? Do you need help?" "No," Maisie continued raking without looking up. Francisco pouted and walked next to her, showing her the box of food. Maisie paused and looked at him helplessly. "I need to clean up, don't bother me," he said. "By the time you're done, the canteen will have been closed. I brought food for you, out of the kindness of my heart. Don't be touched." Maisie didn't want to take it, but her stomach protested. Francisco sneered. "Eat. I'll help you. Just eat quickly. The instructor is still in the canteen anyway." He grabbed the rake. The man who never did chores in his life started raking with enthusiasm. Maisie looked at the box. She didn't know why he wanted to help, but she was thankful. "Thanks." She walked to a bench and filled up her stomach. She didn't know Francisco that well, but he wasn't as bad as she thought. Francisco turned to look at her while raking. Maisie was eating with her head low, her red lips lightly moving when she chewed. Chapter 269. A few strands of hair that were behind Maisie's ear fell to her face. She kept putting them back behind her ear. It was a very common action, but it looked so nice to Francisco. A leaf fell onto her head, and Francisco froze, walked over, but was tripped by the rake. And fell onto Maisie. He saved himself by holding onto the bench, but his sudden movement made Maisie jump. She turned around and suddenly saw Francisco's face right in front of hers. They didn't say anything. Wynonna, who was standing in the shadows, saw that and punched the wall. She took out her phone, snapped a picture, searched for Rowena's chat, and sent it to her. At Black Gold Group, Rowena got to the office and knocked. Nolan closed the file he was reading and looked up. "What is it?" Rowena walked to his desk. "I heard the news that Ms. Vanderbilt went into the restricted area yesterday and had to rake the leaves as punishment." Nolan's eyes narrowed. Why would she go into a restricted zone? Was she hurt? What are the people in the camp doing? Why didn't Sherry tell me? Seeing his darkened expression, Rowena thought that he was angry at Maisie for going into the restricted zone, so she slowly said, "She's fine, but what?" Nolan squinted. "But someone sent a picture to me. I was in a dilemma before I chose to tell you. I'm worried that this might cause a dispute between you and Ms. Vanderbilt." Rowena put the picture in front of him. The picture showed Maisie and Francisco being intimate, but it looked like they were kissing from that angle. "I think this picture was to instigate something between the two of you. If it was to instigate something, why was this picture sent to you?" Nolan coldly looked up at her, his eyes filled with suspicion. Rowena turned pale. She lost her cool, and now Nolan was suspecting her. She bit her lip. "I'm sorry, Nolan, I didn't mean anything. I know that you're worried about Ms. Vanderbilt, so I had someone secretly check on her. I just wanted to give you some updates, but I didn't expect. I'm sorry." Nolan took a long look at her and coldly said, "Don't do anything pointless anymore. You can leave now." Rowena left the office. Nolan's cool was slowly being stripped away. How long could he stay calm? They hadn't seen each other for just a few days, but the woman was already intimate with another man. If it went on for half a month, was she going to elope with him? He really had to take a trip to the camp and remind her that she had a lover and children. When Maisie was checking out some books from the library in the afternoon, the two girls with Wynonna looked at each other and started speaking. "It's fine if the newbie steals other people's men on the outside, but now she's doing it in camp too." "Exactly. She has just been here for a short time. If she were here for a longer time, all the men in the camp would have been seduced." Maisie knew what they meant but ignored them. When she walked past them, Wynonna grabbed onto her and said, "Hey, I know what you did." Chapter 270. Maisie frowned and turned to look at her. "What did I do?" Wynonna smiled gladly, thinking she had caught her secret. "About you stealing men." This woman kept pretending to be innocent but had actually been sent to the camp because she was seducing someone's man. Wynonna had to expose the ugly side of her so that Francisco could see her for what she was. Maisie pulled her hand away and squinted. "I don't think I've offended you in any way?" Not only had she brought her to the restricted area and abandoned her, but Wynonna was also trying to chastise her based on a rumor. Wynonna wasn't going to back down. "You offended me by seducing Francisco." "Francisco? All for that man?" Maisie laughed, raised her brows at her, and said, "It's none of my business if you have a crush on Francisco. Why are you blaming me for your inability to attract him?" "I knew that you're a vixen." Maisie held Wynonna's chin, which scared her. "Well, what are you doing?" That cold face got closer. "Did no one teach you about not judging a book by its cover?" The people around them were confused. "It's not your fault that you have low self-esteem. But not only do you have low self-esteem, but you're also a horrible person. That would be your fault." Maisie let her go, crossed her arms, and stared at her. "What do you think the training instructor would say if I told him that you were the one who brought me, a newbie, into the restricted area and left me there? You. He wouldn't believe you." Wynonna was losing her cool. "Really? You've been here for a year, but I've just gotten here. How would I know where the restricted zone was? You were the one guiding me. Do you think that the instructor is dumb?" Maisie shrugged. Wynonna turned pale and left, stomping her feet. Seeing her walk away, Maisie shook her head. That was such a childish move. Wynonna angrily went to the basketball court to see Francisco and yelled at him. Francisco ignored her. The few men with him shoved him, which made him snap his head around impatiently. What? He was annoyed because he had a misunderstanding with his little goddess. Wynonna walked up to him. Francisco, did you know that Maisie loves to seduce men? I know about her past. She was sent to the camp because she was seducing the wrong man. Don't be fooled. What? Hearing her talking about Maisie. Francisco held the ball between his arm and body and cleared his ears. Are you sick, Wynonna? Why would you trash talk about someone? Francisco, I'm telling the truth. Why don't you believe me? Why should I believe you? He passed the ball to someone and put his arms on his waist. Wynonna, I know you have a crush on me, but you're not my type, and, he pointed at her. Don't you bother Maisie, or I won't let you get away with it. After that, he got the ball from his friend and continued playing. Wynonna yelled at him, You'll regret this. Francisco. Wynonna sat down and started crying because she was wrongly accused. The two other girls came to console her and gave her some ideas. Wynonna dried her eyes, got up, and said, Didn't you hear what he said? He won't let me off if I bother her.